The Louisiana sun beat down on Harmony, a small town steeped in tradition and choked by prejudice. The year was 1955, and the air hung thick, not only with humidity, but with an unspoken code, white above, black below. It was a world where freedom wore shackles, and justice wore a blindfold that only peeked out when it favored the powerful. Elijah, a young boy barely old enough to tie his own shoes, learned this lesson early. He couldn't drink from the same water fountain as the pale-skinned children giggling nearby. The whites' only sign, stark and unforgiving, was a daily reminder of his place, a constant, stinging humiliation. Unsolved mystery stories filled the pulp magazines, but the biggest mystery of all was why the color of his skin dictated the boundaries of his life. The black community of Harmony lived under a web of laws and customs, meticulously designed to keep them subservient. Their schools were underfunded, their voices unheard, and their dreams systematically diminished. Yet, resilience bloomed in the cracks of this broken system. In hushed conversations on shaded porches, they dared to dream of a different America, one where skin didn't determine destiny. The simmering tensions in Harmony were a slow burn, fueled by generations of injustice, waiting for a spark. Johnny, a man carved from the Louisiana earth, possessed hands that spoke the language of engines. In Harmony, if something sputtered, coughed, or flat out refused to start, they called for Ollie. His small garage, a haven of grease and ingenuity, was a testament to his skill, a skill that transcended the color lines, even if respect didn't. Ollie harbored a quiet pride, born not of arrogance but of hard-won competence. He knew he could outsmart any engine, but outsmarting the system designed to hold him back was a different beast. The opportunities dangled just out of reach. A scholarship to a prestigious engineering school, denied. A loan to expand his garage, impossible. Journey of discovery was an everyday man's dream, and impossible in reality. His limited opportunities were a constant ache, a dull throb beneath his quiet demeanor. He yearned for more, not for personal gain, but to uplift his community, to prove that a black man could excel despite the odds. Then, a scene flashed in his mind. Years ago, he was fixing the car of a white man, and the man did not want to pay and insulted him. That day, Ollie's mechanic's heart was only full of anger. But the pain lingered, a reminder of the injustices that fueled both his determination and his quiet rage. For Sarah Ainsworth, Harmony was a gilded cage. Her life, adorned with silks and social graces, felt increasingly suffocating. She lived in a grand estate, surrounded by manicured gardens and whispered expectations, yet her spirit yearned for something beyond the confines of her privileged world. Sarah often found herself lost in books, devouring forbidden novels and philosophical treatises under the cloak of darkness. Thrilling stories of women defying convention fueled her imagination, providing an escape from the stifling reality of debutante balls and tea parties. Flashbacks revealed a young Sarah arguing with her father, a staunch traditionalist, about attending university or pursuing a career, dreams dismissed as unsuitable for a woman of her station. One evening, at a formal dinner filled with potential suitors, Sarah couldn't bear the charade any longer. She excused herself, claiming a headache, and slipped away to the library. Instead of studying etiquette, she unearthed a collection of poetry by black authors, their words igniting a fire within her. This small act of rebellion, a quiet defiance against her father's expectations, was a glimpse of the woman she longed to become, a woman who dared to question the rules of her unsolved mystery life. The Blue Moon, a speakeasy on the edge of Harmony's segregated district, pulsed with a defiant energy. It was a haven where black and white souls dared to mingle, united by a shared love for music and a thirst for something more. Tonight, the air crackled with a heady mix of jazz and rebellion. Johnny, usually reserved, found himself drawn to the energy of the Blue Moon. He nursed a drink, watching the dancers with a keen eye, when his gaze locked with Sarah's across the crowded room. Her blue eyes, bright with intelligence, stood out against the smoky backdrop. She was out of place, a delicate flower in a gritty garden, yet her gaze reflected a determination that intrigued him. Their conversation began cautiously, but quickly blossomed. It wasn't just physical attraction. It was a meeting of minds. They spoke of injustice, of inequality, of the journey of discovery needed to bridge the divide. Sarah shared her love for poetry and progressive ideas, while Johnny spoke of his community's struggles and his hope for a better future. Their shared values, a deep-seated belief in justice and fairness, formed a connection that transcended the color of their skin. A silent rebellion in a world that demanded conformity. Dawn painted the sky in bruised hues. When Johnny found the seals. When Johnny found... Note, it was slipped under the garage door, a stark white rectangle against the grimy concrete. The message, scrawled in jagged handwriting, was simple and chilling. Stay away from her, or you'll regret it. Fear coiled in Johnny's gut. Charles Ainsworth was a powerful man, capable of anything to protect his family's reputation. He sought counsel from Silas, an older mechanic and a father figure in the community. Silas, his face etched with the wisdom of hard-won years, listened patiently before sharing his own story. A tale of facing down prejudice and choosing courage over fear. They can take everything but your spirit, Ollie, Silas rasped, his voice a low rumble. Don't let them have that. Silas's story ignited a fire in Johnny, but the fear lingered. Protect Sarah from Charles's wrath, or stand his ground and risk everything. The internal conflict raged, love battling fear, courage wrestling with the weight of responsibility. The choice before him was impossible. A thrilling story with an unknown ending, but one he knew he had to make. Sarah's arrival at the garage was a whirlwind of nervous energy. Her face was pale, her hands trembling, but her eyes burned with a fierce determination. I can't stay, she declared, her voice barely a whisper. I've been planning this for months. To run away, to start over, and I want you to come with me. Johnny was stunned. He'd expected fear, perhaps a plea for him to end things to protect her. He hadn't anticipated this, a desperate leap into the unknown. Sarah confessed her growing suffocation, the crushing weight of her father's expectations, the emptiness of a life lived for others. I can't breathe, Ollie, she pleaded. This isn't living, it's just existing, and I refuse to exist. Her decision was a desperate act, born from a lifelong yearning for freedom. To find her true self, she had to shatter the gilded cage, forsake her privileged world, and embrace the uncertainty that lay ahead. The risks were immense, the consequences potentially devastating, but the fear of a life unlived outweighed them all. It was a journey of discovery, filled with the opportunity to find a new life. The freight train shuddered and groaned, a metal beast tearing through the darkness. Their escape was far from romantic, cramped in a boxcar filled with the stench of coal and fear. Johnny and Sarah clung to each other, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels a constant reminder of the life they left behind. Sleep was impossible. Every screech of the brakes, every distant whistle sent their hearts racing. Once, the train lurched to a sudden stop. Voices, harsh and demanding, echoed outside. Authority. Johnny pulled Sarah closer, shielding her with his body, his mind racing. It was a false alarm, a routine inspection. But the close call left them shaken, acutely aware of the precariousness of their flight. Unsolved mystery was what their future lay ahead, and the journey was something that must be taken. Amidst the fear, small acts of kindness bloomed. A grizzled old woman shared her meager rations. A young man, also fleeing the south, offered a silent nod of solidarity. These were the faces of resilience, fellow travelers on a road paved with hardship and hope. Their shared oppression forged a silent bond, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, humanity persisted. Bloomfield, Illinois, was a world away from harmony. The air hung thick with the acrid scent of steel, not magnolia blossoms. Brick buildings replaced sprawling plantations, and the faces were a mix of ethnicities, not just black and white. But beneath the surface of this industrial town, the scars of prejudice lingered. Finding work and housing proved far more difficult than they anticipated. Landlords turned them away with veiled excuses, and job opportunities seemed to vanish as soon as they mentioned their names. The discrimination was subtle, a knowing glance, a hesitant tone, a closed door, but it was ever present, a persistent reminder that their past clung to them like a shadow. Thrilling stories were something that are not always true. but the struggle of living and the persistence to continue are. Johnny, with his mechanical skill, eventually landed a job at the sprawling Bloomfield steel mill. He found camaraderie with some of his fellow workers, men hardened by labor and united by their shared struggle, but he also faced prejudice, whispers and sneers, a constant reminder that he was an outsider, a black man daring to compete in a white man's world. The First Baptist Church of Bloomfield, a modest building tucked away on a quiet street, offered sanctuary from the harsh realities of their new life. It wasn't grand, but it was welcoming, a space where acceptance trumped judgment. It was here, surrounded by a small group of friends who understood their struggle, that Johnny and Sarah chose to solidify their bond. Their wedding wasn't a lavish affair filled with fancy clothes or extravagant gifts. It was simple, intimate, and profoundly meaningful. Sarah wore a dress she'd sewn herself, a testament to her resilience and resourcefulness. Johnny, his face etched with a quiet joy, wore a borrowed suit that fit him perfectly. The Reverend Jones, a kind-faced man with eyes that had seen both the best and worst of humanity, spoke of love, commitment, and the strength found in unity. When it came time for the vows, Johnny and Sarah spoke from the heart, their words echoing the values that had brought them together. They vowed to support each other through hardship, to challenge injustice wherever they found it, and to build a future where their children would be judged, not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. It was not a journey to see each other. It was a journey for themselves. In that moment, surrounded by uncertainty and facing an uphill battle, they found a sliver of peace. Their love wasn't a fairy tale, but a conscious decision to stand together, to fight for a better world, and to create a haven of hope in a world often filled with darkness. The exchanging of vows in the church reminded them of the most important thing they seek, and something to look forward to in the future. It wasn't the past, but the future that the two longed for. The Bloomfield steel mill was a behemoth of fire and iron, a place where men pushed their bodies to the limit in exchange for a meager paycheck. For Johnny, the work was grueling. The heat was relentless, the noise deafening, and the hours long and unforgiving. Each shift left him exhausted, his muscles aching, his skin coated in grime. It was all new to him. He was used to fixing cars, not working in steel. The journey was extremely difficult for him, but had Sarah to help get him through this. But amidst the physical toll, a sense of purpose began to emerge. He saw the injustices firsthand, the unsafe working conditions, the unfair wages, the blatant disregard for the well-being of the workers. Inspired by Silas's words, Johnny joined a nascent union organizing effort, hoping to fight for better treatment for himself and his fellow laborers. It was a risky move, one that could cost him his job, but the need for change outweighed the fear. While Johnny found a sense of camaraderie and purpose in the mill, Sarah faced a different kind of struggle. She found work as a seamstress at a small dress shop, but the other women, wary of her privileged background and her marriage to a black man, kept their distance. She sewed intricate seams all day, but the loneliness was a persistent ache. The only company she found was from the rhythmic hum of the sewing machine and the silent longing for connection. The life that she was running might not have been a thrilling life, but it has all the meaning and the hope for new opportunities. The letters arrived like unwelcome ghosts, their crisp, expensive paper a stark contrast to the worn fabric of their new life. Charles Whitmore's words, elegant and cutting, seeped into Sarah's mind, fueling her paranoia and stirring up long-dormant fears. He didn't threaten violence, but his words were a constant reminder of the power he still held, the social stigma that followed them, and the precariousness of their situation. Johnny noticed Sarah's increasing withdrawal. She became more withdrawn, lost in her thoughts, and quick to startle at the slightest sound. He tried to reassure her, to tell her that they were safe, but his words seemed to bounce off an invisible wall she'd erected around herself. One evening, while Sarah was out, Johnny stumbled upon a small stash of cash hidden beneath the floorboards. His heart sank. He knew Sarah had always been resourceful, but the sheer amount of money hinted at something more. A secret plan, a hidden escape route. When Sarah returned, he confronted her. He couldn't quite mask. "What is this, Sarah?" he asked, holding up the money. Were you planning to leave? Did you not trust me? She started shaking. The money, a relic from her past, now cast a shadow over their present, sowing seeds of doubt and distrust in their once unshakable bond. Unsolved mystery was always who had the power, and not necessarily the money to overcome what was to come. The arrival of Isaac filled their small apartment with a joy so pure, so intense, that it seemed to banish the shadows that had been creeping in. Holding his newborn son, Johnny felt a surge of protectiveness, a fierce determination to provide him with a life free from the prejudice and hardship they had faced. Sarah, too, was radiant, her eyes glowing with a love that seemed to transcend all doubts and fears. Journey of discovery had only just begun, but beneath the surface of her joy, a well of guilt stirred. Holding Isaac triggered a flood of memories, a past she had desperately tried to bury. A flashback consumed her. Sarah was a young girl, pregnant and terrified. Her father, cold and unyielding, had arranged for a discreet adoption, ensuring that her mistake wouldn't tarnish the family name. She had fought, pleaded, begged, but her voice was silenced by her father's power. The baby, a boy, was taken from her arms moments after birth, leaving a void that ached with every passing year. Back in the present, Sarah gazed at Isaac, vowing to protect him from the same fate. He would never be a secret, never be denied his heritage, never be forced to carry the weight of her shame. But the secret remained, a heavy burden on her heart. She knew that one day, the truth would have to come out, and the fear of how it would affect Johnny, Isaac, and their fragile happiness haunted her waking moments. The only way to live life is to face your mistakes head on. Years passed, marked by the rhythm of factory shifts and the joys of raising a family. Isaac, a bright and curious boy, brought laughter and light into their lives. And then came Margaret, a whirlwind of energy and independence, completing their family circle. But even amidst the happiness, the seeds of conflict continued to sprout. Johnny's involvement in the union had deepened. He became a vocal advocate for workers' rights, challenging the mill management and rallying his fellow laborers. His activism put him at odds not only with the company, who saw him as a troublemaker, but also with some of the white workers, who resented his growing influence and clung to their prejudices. The steel mill became a battleground, a microcosm of the larger societal struggles for equality. At home, Sarah lived in constant fear. She worried about Johnny's safety, haunted by nightmares of violence and retribution. She also feared that his activism would draw unwanted attention, exposing their past and shattering their fragile peace. Her anxiety created a growing distance between them, a silent tension that Isaac, now old enough to notice, couldn't quite understand. The unsolved mystery was what they were fighting for, and what they were leaving behind. Margaret's arrival, while a source of immense joy, also stirred up Sarah's past. The love she felt for her daughter was fierce and protective, but the fear of history repeating itself, of Margaret facing discrimination, or being forced to carry the burden of her mother's secrets, was a constant weight on her heart. Sarah's paranoia begins to take over her mind. As Isaac and Margaret grew, their innocent curiosity began to pierce the carefully constructed facade of their parents' world. They noticed the subtle glances, the hushed whispers, the invisible lines that divided their community. "Why can't we go to the movies downtown, Mama?" Isaac asked one day, his brow furrowed in confusion. "The other kids say it's just for whites." Sarah froze, her carefully rehearsed explanations failing her. She offered a vague answer about different rules, and some people not understanding, but her evasiveness only fueled Isaac's curiosity. Margaret, ever the perceptive one, picked up on her mother's discomfort. "Is it because Daddy's black?" she blurted out, her innocent question carrying the weight of a lifetime of prejudice. Sarah's avoidance deepened the chasm between her and Johnny. He saw her struggling, saw her fear, but her refusal to be honest with their children frustrated him. He believed in facing the truth, in equipping Isaac and Margaret with the knowledge and strength to navigate a world that wouldn't always be kind. Then came the incident at the steel mill. Johnny, after leading a successful negotiation for better working conditions, was publicly humiliated by the foreman, who used a racial slur and accused him of getting uppity. The humiliation reverberated through the black community, reaching Sarah like a physical blow. Her anxiety spiraled. She saw Charles Ainsworth's hand in everything, a conspiracy to destroy their lives. She pleaded with Johnny to quit the union, to prioritize their safety over his principles. Their home, once a sanctuary, became a battleground of unspoken fears and simmering resentment. The poison of the past was spreading, threatening to consume everything they had built. Thrilling stories about racism were becoming a reality, and not something that can be avoided. The weight of her secrets, the escalating tension at home, and the ever-present fear had taken their toll. Sarah's world began to shrink, confined to the walls of their apartment and the familiar streets of their neighborhood. It felt safer that way, but the illusion of control was shattered one ordinary afternoon. While shopping at the local market, Sarah noticed him. A man standing across the street, his face partially obscured by the brim of his hat. He wasn't doing anything suspicious, just watching. But his gaze felt like a physical touch, invasive and unsettling. She tried to dismiss it as paranoia, a figment of her overactive imagination, but the feeling lingered long after he was gone. The next day, he was there again, a silent sentinel lurking in the periphery. Sarah's anxiety reached fever pitch. She couldn't confide in Johnny, fearing his reaction, so she turned to Esther, a black woman she'd met at the church. Esther, a widow who had weathered countless storms of prejudice and hardship, possessed a quiet strength that Sarah admired. Over cups of steaming coffee, Sarah haltingly recounted her fears, her voice trembling with repressed emotion. Esther listened patiently, her eyes filled with empathy. When Sarah finished, Esther spoke with a gentle firmness. "Honey, you can't run from your past forever. It'll keep chasing you until you turn around and face it head on. It's time to tell your story, Sarah. It's time to set yourself free." Esther's words were a lifeline, a beacon of hope in the swirling darkness. Journey of discovery had always been a struggle, but this was a battle of the mind and not the body. She was afraid to do it alone. Sarah also needed to understand how can one stand from her mistakes and still find herself in her life. With Esther's encouragement, Sarah began to contemplate the impossible, confronting her past, telling Johnny the truth, and finally breaking free from the chains that had bound her for so long. The small apartment, once a haven of love and laughter, now felt like a pressure cooker, the tension simmering beneath the surface, threatening to explode. Johnny, exhausted from long hours at the mill and frustrated by Sarah's increasingly erratic behavior, could no longer contain his concerns. He'd watched her grow more and more withdrawn, more and more fearful, and he felt helpless to break through the wall she'd erected around herself. One evening, after putting the children to bed, he confronted her. "Sarah," he began, his voice weary, "we can't keep living like this. You're not the town's curiosity turned into a shadowy presence." Sarah, already on edge, found herself the subject of whispers and stares. Letters, no longer just from her father, arrived with chilling inquiries about her identity and past. One asked, "Aren't you that Ainsworth girl who ran off?" Another simply said, "We know your secret." The questions weren't confined to paper. Shopkeepers hesitated to meet her eyes, and neighbors, once friendly, now turned away. The children, too, felt the shift. At school, Isaac came home with a bloody nose, muttering about taunts regarding his mother. The whispers became a cacophony, amplifying Sarah's paranoia. Johnny, seeing his family crumbling under this pressure, felt lost. He tried to reassure Sarah, but her fear was a tangible barrier. One night, after another fruitless argument, he quietly gathered his pillow and blanket. "I need some space, Sarah," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. The move to a separate room was not a rejection, but a desperate attempt to salvage what was left of their family. A silent acknowledgement that the shadows had invaded their home and threatened to consume everything. It became a story that no one had ever heard before. The morning started like any other, but the air hung heavy with unspoken tension. Sarah, her face pale and drawn, attempted to make breakfast, but her hands trembled so violently that she could barely hold the dishes. A sudden wave of dizziness washed over her, and she clutched at the counter for support. Before Johnny could reach her, she collapsed, crumpling to the floor like a discarded doll. The doctor's diagnosis was grim. Sarah had a heart condition, exacerbated by years of stress and anxiety. Her body, weakened by fear and burdened by secrets, was finally giving out. Facing her mortality, Sarah saw her life flash before her eyes, a tapestry woven with moments of joy and profound regret. She realized that she could no longer carry the weight of her past, that her secrets were poisoning not only herself, but also the people she loved. Lying in bed, weak and breathless, she looked at Johnny, his face etched with worry and exhaustion. A wave of guilt washed over her. He deserved the truth, no matter how painful it might be. With newfound clarity, she knew that she had to set him, and herself, free. The words remained unspoken, trapped behind a wall of fear. But the decision had been made. The time for reckoning had come. What had come must be. Journey of discovery was no more. The room was heavy with silence, broken only by Sarah's labored breathing. Johnny sat beside her, his hand clasped tightly in hers, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and anticipation. He knew something was coming, something monumental, something that threatened to shatter the fragile peace they had somehow managed to maintain. With a trembling voice, Sarah began. She spoke of her upbringing, of her father's controlling nature, of the loveless marriage that had been planned for her since childhood. Then, the bombshell. She hadn't married Johnny out of love, but out of fear, out of a desperate need to escape a life that was suffocating her. I thought I loved you, Johnny. I tried to love you. But it wasn't love at first. However, as time passes, I realized that it was always you. Johnny listened intently. She could see that he was confused, hurt, and wanted answers. And her last statement may not be enough then. She revealed the deepest, most painful secret of all. The son she had been forced to abandon years ago. Tears streamed down her face as she described the anguish of giving him up, the years of guilt and regret that had haunted her every waking moment. Each word felt like a blow, a hammer shattering the foundation of their life together. The journey of discovery wasn't easy, but a discovery had to be made. When she finished, the silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Johnny's face was unreadable, his eyes filled with a storm of emotions, anger, hurt, disbelief, and a flicker of something else, something that might have been understanding. Her confession broke him to the core, but she tried her hardest to show her love. The question is, does he love her? He said nothing, simply squeezed her hand, his silence more deafening than any accusation. The days that followed Sarah's confession were shrouded in a heavy silence. Johnny moved through the motions of life, going to work, tending to the children. But his heart felt hollow, his spirit broken. He tried to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the woman who had revealed herself to be a stranger. Was their love a lie? Had their life been built on a foundation of deceit? The questions haunted him, swirling in his mind like a relentless storm. One morning, Sarah awoke with a newfound sense of peace. She recounted a vivid dream to Johnny, a dream where she had finally met the son she had been forced to abandon. In the dream, she saw his face, heard his voice, and felt a connection that transcended time and circumstance. The most important part of the story was to understand the other son and what happened to him. "He's looking for me, Johnny," she whispered, her voice filled with a fragile hope. "He wants to know his story, to understand where he came from." "Then," she asked the impossible, "I want you to help him. Can you see if he's okay?" Johnny, gazing at her frail frame, knew that time was running out. He realized that Sarah's peace, her happiness, her last wish hinged on finding this lost son. Despite the pain, despite the betrayal, his love for Sarah, a love that had weathered countless storms, compelled him to act. The kids were also supportive and happy when they realized they had a long-lost brother that they have never met. The children also wanted to help on the journey to help this other person know who he is. The family unites once again to search for her son, to see why he decided to search for his mother. Johnny, fueled by Sarah's fragile hope and his own desire for closure, embarked on a daunting search. He started with the few details Sarah could remember: the name of the adoption agency, the approximate date of birth, the city where she believed the adoptive parents lived. He asked questions, made phone calls, and followed every lead, no matter how faint. It was all about doing what was right for everyone in their life. Weeks turned into months, filled with dead ends and dashed hopes. Just when Johnny began to despair, a breakthrough. A kind-hearted social worker, touched by his story, unearthed a record. A name? Daniel Walker. He was now 25 years old and living in Chicago. Sarah would finally be complete. Johnny traveled to Chicago, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. He found Daniel working at a local bookstore, surrounded by the comforting scent of old paper and the quiet murmur of browsing customers. As he watched Daniel interact with people, his heart broke knowing how someone could make a mistake like that, but did everything they could to change and make the other person's life better. He learned that Daniel was a gifted writer and aspiring poet who was looking to connect with his family. He loved to read and understand and solve puzzles as well. Johnny's heart then filled with mixed emotions of love and betrayal. He couldn't wait to tell Sarah his story. Now she would finally find peace. Johnny raced back to Bloomfield, his mind filled with images of Daniel and the story he desperately needed to share with Sarah. He burst through the door of their apartment, his face flushed with excitement. "I found him, Sarah," he exclaimed, his voice filled with emotion. Sarah's eyes lit up, a faint smile gracing her lips. She listened intently as Johnny described Daniel, his voice, his passion for literature, his kind heart. A wave of peace washed over her, washing away years of guilt and regret. She knew that Johnny was giving her a gift, the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that her lost son was alive and well. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, Sarah's breathing grew shallow. She looked at Johnny, her eyes filled with a love that transcended all the pain and betrayal. "Thank you, Johnny," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You gave me everything." With a final, gentle sigh, she closed her eyes. Johnny held her close. His tears the days after Sarah's passing were a blur of grief and quiet remembrance. Johnny found solace in the love of his children and the support of his community, but the weight of Sarah's secrets still lingered. He knew he had to tell Isaac and Margaret about Daniel, about their unseen brother, but the prospect filled him with trepidation. He gathered them one evening, his heart pounding in his chest. He spoke of Sarah's past, of the choices she had made, and of the son she had been forced to give up. He braced himself for their anger, their confusion, their judgment, but what he received was something far different. Isaac, now a young man with a fierce sense of justice, listened intently, his eyes filled with empathy. Margaret, ever the independent spirit, simply nodded, her acceptance radiating through the room. "He's our brother, Dad," Isaac said softly. "We should meet him." With their support, Johnny contacted Daniel, extending an invitation to visit. A few weeks later, Daniel arrived in Bloomfield, his face a mirror image of Sarah's. The meeting was awkward at first, filled with tentative smiles and hesitant words. But as they shared stories, memories, and dreams, a bond began to form. A connection forged in the crucible of shared history and enduring love. They never forgot Sarah, but Daniel's arrival filled a void in their lives. It wasn't a replacement, but a completion, a testament to the enduring power of family and the possibility of redemption. Together they embarked on a new chapter, carrying Sarah's love in their hearts and embracing the future with open arms. The story had to start somewhere, and it came down to two brothers. This story underscores powerful life lessons about navigating adversity and the transformative potential of honesty. First, face your past, as burying secrets only breeds future turmoil. Just like Sarah, avoiding difficult truths can lead to escalating stress and heartache. Instead, confront past mistakes head-on, seeking healing and understanding. Second, embrace empathy and forgiveness in relationships. Johnny's journey exemplifies that love can endure even through profound betrayals when met with compassion. In your own relationships, strive to understand the motivations behind others' actions, fostering an environment of forgiveness and support. Third, stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Johnny's union activism highlights the importance of fighting for justice and equality, despite the potential risks. Identify your values and be courageous in defending them, even if it means facing opposition. Finally, family is not only blood relation, as it is built on love and acceptance. Daniel's arrival shows that love can bring two people from different walks of life, that love is not only in the blood. Open your heart, and you will create a safe space for all. By heeding these lessons, you can navigate life's complexities with greater wisdom and resilience, fostering more meaningful relationships and personal fulfillment.